everybody. Welcome to our 50th episode celebration. And I have Michael F. Schein joining us today. Hi, Michael. How's it going?
Hey there, Ina. How are you?
Doing great. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you are about to teach us how to be micro celebrities in our niche. And I can't wait. So tell us who you are and what you've been up to lately.
Sure. So again, my name is Michael F. Schein. I am the president and founder of Microfame Media. We are, for lack of a better term, and we'll see why I'm saying this, a marketing agency. And we work with idea-driven businesses and some individuals to help them become the most well-known figure in their niche. I am also most recently the author of the Hype Handbook, which was just released with McGraw-Hill on January 12th. So I'm very excited about that. And the subtitle kind of explains it all. It's 12 indispensable success secrets from the world's greatest propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers. And if you see me looking away from the camera, if you're watching this, that's because it's such a long subtitle that I have to look down to remember the order.
That sounds like I'm going to go and get that book right now because that's something that I've actually thought about. It's like, how can we use all of the techniques that for lack of a better word, the most successful propagandists have used, but how can we use those skills for good, right? It seems like it's the evil that has gotten a handle on how to get you to do evil things. How do we turn that around? How do we take that kind of marketing prowess and turn it into doing good in the world, right? So it sounds like a book that I need to go and get right now, and we'll put the link in the description for everybody. All right.
Thank you. Yeah. So, that was my intention, to do exactly what you just described.
It's something I have thought about in the past. Like, man, if only the best people in the world could get everybody else as riled up. I'm actually really curious. How did the idea for the book come up?
So, and I'll try to tell the short version of this story. It's a winding story. It really has its roots in my earliest days as an entrepreneur. I had always wanted to be in the arts. I never wanted to be involved in business, ironically, because now I really like business. Mm-hmm. However, when I first left college, I was in a band. It was kind of a punk band, and we used to do all kinds of antics to get attention, maybe to compensate for talent. I don't know, but I would dress like a nun, and we would put offensive signs up, and we got ourselves on Showtime at the Apollo because we knew we would get booed off. And as a result, we got a lot of attention. I mean, we used to sell out a popular club called Arlene's Grocery a lot. We got a lot of press, but it's very hard to become a literal rock star. So it didn't work out. I got a corporate job, and over the years, lost my soul a little bit and became kind of straight-laced. And so when I went on my own, I decided, I was going to become a business writer because I saw opportunity there. And I figured because I was a good writer, people would pay me for my skills. And that didn't work. I almost burned through a year's worth of savings. It was very terrifying. And I was reading every sales and marketing book that was out there. I was a real student, but I had just gotten in this corporate mindset of doing things in this sort of straight-laced way that none of it worked for me. I was very ineffective. And then at wit's end, I kind of thought back to my past, and I was like, I used to be this admirer of all these mischief makers. I mean, early rock managers and hip hop managers, but pranksters, even propaganda artists. I was interested in cults, and we used to apply some of that to our band, but I had totally forgotten that. So I said, okay, is it possible for me to ethically apply some of these ideas to my own business, or do I have to be a con artist? Because I didn't want to do that. I didn't leave my job to be a scumbag. So I started to use those tactics, and we can talk about how, with some moral ground rules, ethical ground rules, and it started to work. I started to do well, and it turned into an agency. So when I started to see, even especially in the last 5 years or so, people using these tactics to sort of advance what I don't consider positive agendas, and people falling into it, it just occurred to me that it was almost my moral imperative to sort of codify these ideas that some of the negative players come to more easily and put them in the hands of people doing good businesses and good projects so they can have a competitive advantage, because the bad guys don't need it. I mean, they tend to get it naturally. So that was how the book idea came about. I don't even call it marketing. I call it hype, because to me, marketing it's too easily confused with like, let me figure out if I should use ClickFunnels or if I should use Aweber. It's this, people confuse the idea that marketing should be about attracting attention and getting people to buy from you and getting people emotional. They focus on the tactics. So I wanted to use the word hype, which I just consider, even though it has negative connotations, getting a large number of people emotional so that they'll take an action on your behalf. So in that book, I looked at all of these different people who did these things and sort of boiled it into 12 tactics. The first tactic, and the most important tactic without which any of the rest work, is called make war, not love. It's that people are much more attracted to when you position yourself against something than when you talk about what you're for. So that doesn't have to be against a person. It can be against an idea. But as someone who owns an agency, a lot of people will come to me and I'll say, like, tell me about your business, and they'll be like, our our SaaS software is the most highly integrated, quickest, blah blah blah. They'll talk about how great their stuff is. And the idea is, what's your point of view? In other words, do you have a point of view where you're adding to the conversation but saying something new? And I think the best way to figure that out is, instead of talking about all the great stuff that your product or service does, think about what's a point of view, a sacred cow, a bit of gospel in my field that everyone just accepts without question, that I've really felt was wrong or thought might be wrong for a very long time, but was scared to say so.
Yeah.
And try saying so. And I can give you some examples of how this is used in the business world, and sometimes it's more subtle than what I did. I just went all out. That's not what I'm saying to do.
Right.
But taking strong stands and having a point of view will probably do more for you in attracting attention and getting people to bond with you than anything else you can do.
And with that, you have started on our top 5 things that you should be keeping in mind when you are going for becoming a micro celebrity in your niche. Make war, not love. This is actually something that I learned from one of my coaches, Ron Reich, over the past couple of years. It's like, you need to have an enemy. And whenever he would talk about that, people, us online coaches in the audience were like, but we don't want to come off as going against people or bad mouthing anybody, and so it's a concept that is kind of hard to use and turn it into a positive. So I would love for you to give us another example that kind of speaks to that fear, that like, oh, well, that may work for Michael, but it's not what I'm going to do. Can you give us another example that will help us use it for good?
Yeah. And in fact, I think this is a great point, because I think people confuse this concept with trolling.
Yeah.
With going on and picking fights and being a jerk. That is not what I'm saying. First of all, I think that hurts the world. And second of all, I think it backfires a lot. I mean, I never made fun of Gary Vaynerchuk's looks, his voice, his attitude, nothing. I mean, and nor would I.
Right.
It wasn't about that. But yeah, a great example is Basecamp. So Basecamp is for those of you who don't know, it's a project management software.
Yeah, we used to use it in corporate. Yeah.
So, pretty brass tack stuff, has the potential to be pretty boring, but important. But the thing about Basecamp is that, unlike almost any project management software that came before it, it's stripped down and simple. So it only really does about 6 things. And so the founders of the company could have just said, we have a very simple, easy to use project management software. And that's nice. That might have helped. That's not what they did. They created an entire worldview in books like Rework, in a very popular blog, that basically said that workaholism and ultra complexity were killing business.
Mhm.
So they would say things like fire your workaholics because they're taking on unnecessary work. That's why they work so hard and they're not efficient. They would say things like, just because your client asks you to do something and demands it be done, you can say no. Because what would typically happen in the project management development world is a client would say, I absolutely need this software to do X, Y, and Z. And they would rush around to do it, the developer, and then they would add it to every subsequent version. And before you knew it, you had a software that did 652 things, and it was almost impossible to use for
Yeah.
you needed a specialist to do it. And it created a movement because there were a lot of people that, even though they were being told to work around the clock and under promise, and what do they say? Under promise and over deliver. And they just kind of say that as gospel. Now, here were these two guys saying, listen, great work does not equal running around like a chicken without a head and doing everything everyone asks you to do. And as a result, that software has like a cult following. When people talk about Basecamp and it's project management software, they're like, it's not like, oh, I used Basecamp. It's like, I use Basecamp. I totally believe in the Basecamp method, right? So
Yeah.
that's, I think, a good example. So it doesn't have to be controversial or obnoxious. It has to be courageous.
Right. I totally get it. I love how you put it. It's creating a universe that people prefer over what exists right now. But you have to create it right now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
People are just falling into micro universes that different marketing teams have come up for you, right? Different marketing teams have put those words in your mouth. They have given you the ability to say those things. So it's a matter of being courageous in creating a different world so that people want to join it. And that requires you saying exactly what you stand for, and it can't be the same as everybody else.
And if you don't have something in your industry that you disagree with, you should probably not be in business. I know that sounds harsh, but if the only reason that you're self-employed is because you want to be self-employed, you're probably not going to survive.
Yeah, I love it. This is great. Why don't we jump to point number 2 of 5 of becoming a micro celebrity? We got number 1, make war, not love. What is number 2, Michael?
So the second piece of being a micro celebrity, and it's no accident that these are 5 of the 12 hype strategies, because they're one and the same as far as I'm concerned. I call it build a secret society, or sometimes I call it the piggybacking method. So what the best hype artists do, and I say hype artist is a very positive thing. Those are the people who drive a lot of attention in a certain space to become well known.
Mm-hmm.
They always make it look like their success is completely grassroots. Like people are just, they don't lie, but it's just kind of this perception that they're just getting all these followers and fans and buzz in the media. But what they almost always do at the same time, even usually more so, is they've spent a long time fostering very deep connections with the most influential people in their niche. And when I say influencers, I don't mean like teenagers who play Minecraft. I mean just very powerful people who, if they say something, 10,000 people will do it. And behind the scenes, they kind of create what they used to call an old boys network, but it can now be an old girls network or whatever.
Old people's network.
Old folks network. They'll. So I mean, I'll give you a great example of this from the business world. So Tucker Max was this guy, pretty much known. He wrote a book called 20 years ago now, I think. I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. And it was just a misogynistic type book about how he just hooked up with girls and got drunk. And it sold like millions of copies. And, eventually he got married and had a kid, and he didn't want to be known for that anymore, but he still wanted to be a millionaire. And he was a very savvy guy, but he had spent all this time building really strong relationships. So Ryan Holiday was sort of his protege. And then Ryan Holiday became a superstar. He's friends with James Altucher. He came up with Tim Ferriss. They all came up together, and he spent a lot of time nurturing these relationships. So he created a business that at the time was called Book in a Box. I think now it's called Scribe Media. I might be getting that wrong. But it's essentially, it was like sort of a ghostwriting service on steroids. It almost doesn't matter what it is. And he could have sat there and done Facebook ads and this and that. And he did all of that eventually. But what he did was he called James Altucher, Tim Ferriss, Ryan Holiday, all these people with massive followings and said, listen, talk up my product. And he was on all of their podcasts. They all talked up. And he did like, I don't know, $1 million in revenue in a month or something like that. So that's a perfect example of how you need to find those human pressure points and nurture them. And there are ways to do that.
So for someone who's listening who may not have Tim Ferriss on speed dial, right? What are some ways that people who are starting out can take advantage of this kind of influence that they're seeking?
It's a great point, because one of the biggest sort of pushbacks that people say against even becoming an entrepreneur or when they're sort of feeling sorry for themselves, they'll say, I don't know people. Things only work when people know people. And I didn't know people. The internet makes it very simple to know people. Not easy, but simple. It takes work. So for example, I'll give you a few tactics, very hard and fast tactics. If you're on social media, let's say Twitter, to just use an easy example, instead of trying to build this 1 million person following, instead sit back and monitor people that you admire and want to know. And every once in a while, in the midst of all their business promotion, they'll let something human slip. A band they like, a sports team they're into, a coffee shop they go to, and talk to them about that. Because even powerful people are human. So, I mean, there's this guy, Brian Clark, who owns Copyblogger, which is a huge deal in the content marketing world. And he's constantly talking about business stuff, content stuff. But once in a while, as I mentioned a few times, I like punk music, and but I'm a middle-aged guy. That music's old. So a lot of people who like punk music were creative kids who tried to be cool through punk music and then became rich because they were creative, right? Because it's old already. So I would once in a while, I would see like Brian Clark would mention a band that was like an underground band from when I was young. And I'd say, that's weird, And then he had Henry Rollins speak at one of his conferences. And that's the singer of Black Flag, right? That's not your typical like business speaker. So I was like, there's something here, So I talked to him about that. And of course he responded to me and we started trading messages and now we know each other. So that's the first thing. The second thing is use come in as a buyer, not a seller. So what I mean by that is, let's say you start a podcast or a blog or a piece of digital media. Something that I've done, like we had a client who we created a podcast for her, very cheap and easy, very simple to do. And the thing wasn't even live yet. And she wanted to meet really prominent media figures. So we wrote a number of people, one of whom was Danielle Feinberg, who was the director of photography at Pixar, like the main person behind the lighting for all your favorite Pixar movies. She's a TED speaker, not TEDx, TED. And we wrote her and we said, hey, Ms. Feinberg, we're profiling on our podcast the top 20 new media minds of today, and you're on the short list. Would you like to be on the show? Now, granted, this podcast at this time had 0 listeners because it didn't exist yet. She responded to us within 2 hours and said, oh, that's such an honor. I'm never recognized in that way. And we had her on the show. Now, as a result, the podcast is very popular now, and this client achieved all their goals. So it's a function of what is something that you can give up pretty easily that's valuable to them, to someone else.
Yeah.
And everyone's got something. I can give you 50 examples on this, but you just have to be creative.
So I'm going to say that back to you, because actually you're touching on things that I have heard people who are big in publicity say all the time, right? Which is, number one, you're not afraid to pitch. Number two, you find common ground.
Can I interrupt that though?
Yeah.
When people say that, don't be afraid to pitch, people make a mistake because they hear that and they get up all their courage and they say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to pitch. And then they email 100 people and they say, John Smith Consulting Service is the most cutting edge consulting service of the last 5 years. And it would be I would love to have it featured in your magazine. And then they
Right.
wonder why they didn't hear back. Because
Right.
no, that's not news. No one wants to cover your thing. It's not about pitching. It's about, don't be afraid to approach someone with something you can do to help them.
Yeah.
That they may not be able to do, even though they're rich and famous. It's just such an important distinction because people get this wrong
Thank you.
all the time. Yeah.
Thank you. So you are not pitching. We are establishing a relationship. We're establishing a connection. We're referring to something that they know about or they like, that we like, or we know about. And we're offering a service. We're doing something for them that maybe they don't get a lot. Maybe they don't hear a lot. One of those people was Selena Sue. She's big in the publicity space. And she said one of the big things that she did was approach Ramit Sethi and say, hey, like, here's some things about publicity that I can like help you with, or a few little pieces of feedback. And Ramit Sethi is like, oh, those are actually really well thought out pieces of feedback. Can we do more stuff together? And she just kind of went off from there. So offering,
and she does that all the time. I happen to know her, and she comes across as very, she's not loud and outspoken and all of this stuff, but she always finds that thing that you need at the exact right moment. And as a result, she's very, very successful.
Yeah, and that's an art to find that kind of thing, especially when we're starting. We're like, what do I have to offer? Think about it. Okay, we got number 1, make war, not love. Number 2, build a secret society. Number 3, what is it, Michael?
This is everyone's favorite title. Give the babies their milk before you give them meat.
That sounds like a solid tip. Let's go to number 4. So what is this milk before meat?
So that's actually a phrase that comes from religion. A lot of religions talk about that. What it basically means is that if you have every religion is wacky when you first hear about it. Like a lot of the religions that we accept, it's because we're used to them, but they're all weird if you think about it. And new religions are very weird, and most of them fail. So if you were to just come up to someone in the street and say, there are these aliens that live on the lip of a volcano. And a long time ago, they were spewed out of the volcano and implanted themselves in every human being on Earth's head. And that's why we have negative thoughts. But you can dispel them using this secret technology. You might call the insane asylum or the mental hospital to take care of them. But that's Scientology. That's what Scientologists believe. Now, Scientologists will never tell you that when you first meet them. If they're trying to recruit you, they will say, I have this really interesting, I read this book called Dianetics, and it really teaches you how to sort of be a positive thinker so that you can get what you want out of life. And then you go to the place and it doesn't even look like kooky. It's I don't mean to call Scientology kooky, although it is, but but it helps.
Don't mean to, but there it is.
Yeah. But all religions look kooky, right? But their centers, they have this technology called an e-meter, and it's kind of like the stuff we see at business coaching seminars. It's very like these various steps and programs, and it's very, very, and it's we're American, especially as Americans, we have this like self-help culture, so it looks very familiar and it makes sense. And slowly but surely, they start introducing the other stuff. And before you know it, you're believing in aliens and volcanoes and Xenu and all of this stuff. So just like you don't give a baby a steak when they're first born. So there are scientific reasons for this. Human beings hate big changes, and they hate things that are radically unfamiliar to what they're used to. So if you have an idea or system or process or whatever product that is that is truly unusual, that's helpful and great, but hard to accept, you need to be as small c conservative in the way you present it in the beginning as possible. Rapid and familiar language, introduce it in stages, ease them into it. That's very, very important.
Okay, so give babies their milk before you give them meat. Introduce radical ideas with more familiar concepts and kind of get them there. Get a bunch of yeses before you introduce something that they may not say yes to in the first step. What is number 4?
Be a trickster until it no longer serves you. So This is when I talk about hype, this is what most people think of. They think of pranks and mischief and craziness. They think of rock managers getting their stars to pretend to bite the heads off of bats and PT Barnum and this sort of stuff. Being mischievous, even in an overt way, can be very useful, even in business, when you don't have resources. When you have no other ways to get attention, creating theater and mischief and drama is very effective. But what the most effective micro celebrities, hype artists, whatever you want to call them, do is they do that and they know when to shift. Like Ryan Holiday, who's a wonderful marketer, he was like a professional prankster. He did American Apparel's marketing, and he advertised a clothing company by having a porn star with nothing but socks. I mean, just different things like this. But we don't think of him that way. We think of him, he writes books about Stoic philosophy, and he's very sober-minded because he knew exactly when to start shifting. When he became part of the establishment, he shed that prankster, trickster shell. Otherwise, you become Dennis Rodman, where you're 55 years old and you still have yellow hair and are going to North Korea for attention.
What would be a good example of being a good trickster?
Well, yeah, I mean, I like to use examples from rock and roll because I think sometimes when people think about being a trickster, being a hype artist, they think it's about negativity. And I think when done right, it can add a lot of color to life. As long as you're not hurting anyone, it can actually make life more fun. So, I mean, there's a great example. Alice Cooper, which was the band. People think of Alice Cooper as the guy, the singer, but that was actually the name of the band.
Yeah.
And their manager was a guy named Shep Gordon, and he didn't even like their music. So he made sure they were always very theatrical. So they were like the first shock rocker. They would do on-stage decapitations. They would do all of this crazy stuff, right? So they got popular through that in the US, but in England, they weren't really sticking. And they had a show at Wembley Arena. And like 2 weeks before the show, they had only sold 500 tickets. So it was going to be a disaster. So Shep Gordon got a picture taken of Alice Cooper, the singer, naked on a billboard. A lot of naked people on billboards, but naked on a billboard with a boa constrictor, like hiding his private area. He put it like life size or bigger than life size, billboard size, on the back of a truck. And he had the truck drive through Piccadilly Circus, which is the most trafficked area of London, during rush hour. And he paid the guy off to make sure the truck broke down at rush hour. So now in the middle of the day, there's this naked picture of Alice Cooper in the middle of everything. And Parliament went crazy. They were saying ban them from the country. But this actually goes back to step one, because this stuff is integrated. He knew that teenagers wanted to find themselves against their parents. So he knew that anything he could do to get parents to hate this band would make the band popular.
Wow.
And they sold out Wembley Arena, and they became like one of the biggest acts of the 70s in England. So, but that was fun. I mean, we don't tell that story and say, what a horrible person. He ruined people's workday. I mean, that's rock lore. That's fun. That adds color to the world. We're happy there are stories like that.
Yeah. All right. That is the Be a Trickster. Now we're on to the final point. Point number 5 of becoming a micro celebrity. What do you have, Michael?
So fetishize work. This was the thing I picked a fight with Gary Vee about, but I started to dig into what he was doing because he's such a good marketer. I doubt he does this on purpose, but he's just inherently a hype artist. So I wondered why Gary Vaynerchuk cared about spending so much of his time screaming at people to work hard. Because there are very few entrepreneurs who are like, yeah, I think I'm going to work 3 hours today, right? I mean, that's usually not the stance. So why was he spending 80% of his time doing this? And I started to look into cults. And almost to a one, what religious cults do is they get people to work like dogs on their behalf, and they kind of make it seem like they're going to get some kind of spiritual salvation from it. So there was this cult leader many years ago named Gurdjieff, who some people still like. He is this like new age kind of guy. And you would regularly come to his compound and there would be like Hollywood celebrities digging holes to nowhere. Or the Moonies, they work 65 hours a day on behalf of the cult. And the reason this works so well is that if you're working really hard on behalf of a common cause, and then someone tells you, you know, let me give you evidence why this thing isn't so great, there's cognitive dissonance. Our brain doesn't like to hold two thoughts that are contradictory at the same time, especially if we previously decided on one of them. So you'll sort of double your commitment to the thing, because it makes people feel really unpleasant if they think they spent a lot of time working on behalf of a lost cause, on something that was useless. So working on behalf of something bonds you to them. At the same time, it you can get free work done, like Tom Sawyer with his white fence. So I'll give you again, I always use the extreme example, but I can give you an example of how to use this in a much more toned down way.
I like hearing both, because I like hearing like what worked, like what was the inception of it, and then kind of like bringing it down to earth a little bit. Tell me both. Well, tell me the big one first.
Well, the big one is what I just said. I mean, cult leaders making people saying you're going to get spiritual deliverance by digging holes for 19 hours in the ground. I mean, that's the extreme one. Getting Hollywood celebrities who don't even get their own drinks to, you know, work in a field.
Right.
No, but this can actually be done extremely ethically as well. So, you know, I think about marketing agencies and their business model versus like consultants and coaches of a certain type, the really successful ones. So in a marketing agency, even though you can do really well, it's a hard business and the margins are low, because every time, because you're expected to do the marketing work for the client, for them, do the work. So what that does is that creates a dynamic where you're being paid and you need to get this result. And if you get a result, it's why didn't you do more, right? Because you're the one doing the work. And that's fair. People are paying good money. But what happens is you have to continually hire new staff. You have to continually manage clients. And that's fine. There's a lot of benefits to that. However, it's challenging. And then I went to this thing called Strategic Coach a number of years ago. And it was recommended to me by the guy I mentioned before, the gentleman who owns the $500 million company. He said, you've got to do this thing. And I would recommend it wholeheartedly to anybody who is at a point where they want to, you know, build systems for their business. It was great. It was really useful. However, I paid a lot of money. I paid $10,000 for a year, which was a lot of money, because you go to 4 classes throughout the whole year. You fly to Chicago and you do 8 hours, an 8-hour class 4 times a year. There are some supplementary phone calls, but they're not really the crux of the thing. I stopped doing them. Not only that, there are pre-printed information tools that you use that you customize while you're there. So I would do all the work because it was a lot of money for me, but I would go back every 3 months and I would hear people saying things like, you know, oh, to the coach, Mary, I'm so sorry. I really didn't work hard enough this time. I implemented the tools in the beginning, but not at the end. And she would say, oh, progress, not perfection. So it occurred to me, I'm like, wow, there's a dynamic here where you're supposed to do all the work. And these people are apologizing that they didn't get results because they didn't work hard enough. And in my world, people like your worst clients will like not show up to 3 interviews you set up and then complain that they're not famous. And I'm like, This is really psychologically interesting. So if you can create a dynamic or a business model where you're providing value, but the bulk of the implementation is on your clients, and you make it very clear, subtly but clearly, that if they don't get results, the fault is theirs because they didn't work hard enough, they will pay you more money and be more appreciative than if you do the work for them.
It is crazy. So I guess if anybody, all my online coaches who are listening, just take this as a lesson, that it's what people say is you teach others how to treat you.
Right.
right? So you
Yeah.
gotta set that up in a way that you're gonna feel good about it. We don't want to be the run ourselves to the ground for a client because we forgot to kind of set that boundary, but we're always such people pleasers. They're like, no, whatever my client wants, I'm going to give to them. It's like, it doesn't have to be that way, and you don't have to be evil,
I
right?
think what makes it easier to do, because I'm a people pleaser too, what makes it easier if when you say to yourself, I need to set the boundary so that I have my own sanity,
Mhm.
we're such driven people that that's easy to forget about very quickly because you want to do a good job. But when you say, I'm actually going to be more persuasive and sell more of my stuff to these people while making them do the work instead of me, that's a pretty good incentive, to set those boundaries.
Right, right. Okay, so let's recap here. Our 5 top pieces of advice from Michael F. Schein on how to become a micro celebrity in your niche. Number 1, make war, not love. Number 2, build a secret society. Number 3, give the babies their milk before you give them meat. Number 4, be a trickster until it no longer serves you. Know when to stop. And number 5, fetishize work. Okay, Michael, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for doing this. Are there any parting words, any pieces of advice that you can give us, everybody who's listening, about getting themselves out there?
I guess I would just say that it is really my fervent wish that more people embrace with pleasure the idea of hyping themselves up,
Mm.
because I see all these people selling garbage who have no compunction about using group psychology, and they just tend to take to it more easily. And I see people creating such great services, books, businesses, artwork, causes, who can't get people to pay attention because they feel it's beneath them. I just hope people change that dynamic, because we need all of you great people bringing attention to yourselves. And there is a way to do it. And
Amazing.
and keep your soul intact. That's the
And keep
important
your
thing.
soul and be
Yeah.
ethical about it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us where can people find you, and tell us again the name of your book and where we can get?
Sure. So the book, and thank you for that opportunity. That's great. Um, the book's called The Hype Handbook. It is, wherever books are sold, primarily. I mean, the online sources are great. Amazon, the online Barnes and Noble site. It is in bookstores too, and I'm a fan. I think it hasn't arrived at the time of this recording in bookstores yet because of a slowdown, but it'll probably be there by the time this comes out. But yeah, the Hype Handbook. It's in all those places, and it would be my honor and pleasure for anyone to read it and tell me what they think if they get in touch with me. As for me, I know that saying online places, it can get really lost. I'm assuming you'll put it in the show notes, but yeah, I mean, my website is michaelfschein.com, Schein, my author site. The company is microfamemedia.com. There's something I really love doing. I have this thing called the Hype Book Club. So as I was researching this book, I noticed I was reading all of these unusual and interesting and entertaining books that weren't your typical 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is a good book, but everyone's read that. These are really unusual books that you can get a lot from. So I started giving out my recommendations to people, and it kind of exploded. It's become a community. We trade ideas all the time. We trade messages. So if you want to sign up for that, it's hypereads.com/list.
Love it. We're going to put all those links below. Are you on Instagram or on Facebook?
I am on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I have a big presence on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I do not use Instagram much. I don't like taking pictures, I
Yeah.
think that's what it comes down to. Generation X, I guess.
Well, we're going to follow you in all of those places. Michael, thank you so much for doing this. And this has been great.
I had so much fun. Thank you.